Good morning, y'all. This is Lou. So, right now, let's discuss me, an urbanist. Um, I didn't know what urbanism was until later on in my life. And if you don't know what urbanism is, I suggest you check out the YouTube channels, Not Just Bikes. Um, Adam Something has some very good videos on urbanism, as well as City Nerd, City Beautiful, and Strong Towns. These are all urbanist uh, channels and media outlets. So, how did I become an urbanist? Well, really, all it took was reflection back onto throughout the course of my life and reflecting on where I lived and how happy I was in the places that I lived. Um, this has been studied, and suburbs are found to be pretty miserable because you're really far away from everything, and you can't get anything done without a car. So essentially, kids are imprisoned in their houses unless they know other kids in their neighborhood, in which case they just go to other kids' houses. But it's hard for them to like really engage with the city around them. So when I look back on my life, I think to myself, where did I live where I was having the best time, where I really loved where I lived and got a lot out of it. And honestly, when I think of times that my mother and I, because my mother was able to go through like all the stages of what should be housing till you get to what is considered the American dream, the goal, which is the single family home. Uh, when we got to the single family home, that was probably the worst times for me psychologically. We moved to a neighborhood, a part of the city that I lived in, where we were far from my friends. Um, so that was more difficult, more isolation. And, I had a bike, but I had to ride that bike a lot further. I understood the city buses very well because, my mother's sister, my aunt taught me that. How to get around on buses. And when I was a kid, you could do that a lot more freely. You could be 10 years old taking buses places and nobody messed with you. I mean, I don't think anybody would mess with you now still, but people just more get in each other's business. So when we lived, right before we got to the single family home, we lived in a duplex. The duplex was cool. Um, there were like 3 units that each had a duplex close to each other. And this was among single family homes. So it was mixed housing in Florida. And there were other duplexes down the street, like other homes that had been converted into duplexes down the street. And an elementary school, like about 2 blocks away to the left coming out of my house, and to the right there's a big park with a trail, like a whole lot of exercise equipment. I mean, it was big because it was right behind a hospital. So uh, all this stuff was like right in the middle of this area, and it was easy to find other kids because with the mixed housing, more families lived in a smaller area. That was pretty cool. I made friends there and had a good time living there. Actually, I was kind of sad when we moved out of there. Right before that, we lived in an apartment. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The apartment was actually the funnest time for me. Um, there were tons of kids that lived in that apartment. Tons. Like, you couldn't go outside and not run into another kid. And the apartments were behind a shopping center where there was a big Sears, there was a Baskin Robbins, barbershop, like shoe store, and a big Publix grocery store. We have those down south in Florida. For all my Florida people, what Publix is. So commerce was literally walking distance away. Like, all we had to do was walk down a street and around a fence and around a building, and there you are. Like, the Sears also had video games in there. So as a kid, that was really cool. Now, across the street in the other direction, directly in front of the apartment complex, was a strip mall that had a laundromat and a little Cuban cafeteria. So the laundromat also had video games. The cafeteria, they got to know the kids in the neighborhood so well that they would often give us water because it was really hot. During the summer, we're outside playing. If we went by, we'd see the owners like wave us in and like tell us to get water. Um, And if you went there certain times a day, you could get like a free empanada or something. Like, because they cooked them early in the morning. If they didn't sell them all, they would change them out. So they would give them to us, to the neighborhood kids. And then on the other side of the street, now this is where it's a little weird because it was across a 3-lane road that was called Campbell Drive in a city called Homestead, Florida. Homestead is like an offshoot of Miami, but it's kind of far. It's a far drive. So there was it was called Harris Field. Harris Field was a gigantic park, like baseball fields, uh, soccer pitches, just a big empty space for people to run around in. There was park apparatus there as well, and for a while that's where the Homestead Pal boxing gym was. So if we were accompanied by an older kid, our parents would let us go to the park. But all that was within such short walking distance that I didn't even need to ride my bike that much. That was the best time. Living like that. Now, a lot of people say, well, but I like my space and I like, I don't want to be cramped on top of each other. But the point of the matter is, if you look at it economically, okay, like, let's say we were thinking like a conservative, like, let's say we were thinking like a fiscal conservative. So we look at this economically, the space, how much more taxpayers in one area do you have? The businesses in that area at the time were packed in tighter into one parking lot. So the more businesses that are there in one parking lot instead of a big box store with miles of parking, this was not like that. This had a normal sized parking lot. And the strip mall had a small parking lot. So you have more taxpayers and you have better use of the space. And then the park drew more commerce because people are going in and out of that park all day long. There were a lot of events, community events held there. So you go to the park, you come across the street, you get some ice cream at the Baskin Robbins, or you need to go shopping, you go to the Sears. Your kid needs a haircut, there's a barbershop. You need to wash some clothes, there's a laundromat. It was a nice laundromat. You're hungry, there's the cafeteria. It was all within such a small distance that it just made sense. I looking back throughout my life, this really made much more sense and was a lot easier to navigate and get around. The kids all day long, like if I'd have to go to the Sears to find a friend, they're there playing video games. If they're not there, they're at the laundromat playing video games. If they're not there, they might be at the park. So kids had a lot more mobility and independence. They weren't trapped in their homes and can't go anywhere unless their parents drive them. So I'm a really big fan of urbanism, and that's the story of why I like urbanism, reflecting throughout my own life. Now, down below this video, you'll see a video of me walking around my neighborhood with my 2 sons on our way to a gym. Because this neighborhood we live in is like the remnants of a walkable neighborhood. There's not a grocery store as close as I'd like. There was, you can tell because there's one around the corner, and you can tell there used to be grocery stores in there. But you can get most things in this neighborhood within walking distance, and that's like a really cool aspect. Now, unfortunately, neither my wife or I work close by. The gym I work at is like a 20-minute drive away. That makes things a ton more difficult, and I didn't really start thinking about this until I started thinking about opening a gym. And if I could open a gym right around the corner, I'd be able to walk to work every day. Think about how much money that saves in gas, just gas alone. Like 20-minute drive every day versus just walking across the street. So please look into urbanism. If you haven't before, check it out. It's a really good thing to get into. Cost effective, greener, uses less energy. Urbanists tend to like to plant trees and gardens and stuff like that. So, we're dealing with these hotter temperatures. Be a lot cooler if we planted trees. This has been Lou, on your left.